What you heard was the president saying essentially this, that thanks to his policies and those of the Democratic Party and Congress, the economy is now recovering. 7 years, a little bit late, but it's recovering, he says, after the meltdown of 2008. And that, furthermore, Obama, is leading the charge against austerity. He wants to tax the rich. He wants to raise the capital gains and the inheritance tax. He wants to make community college free and provide sick leave and family leave and raise the federal minimum wage and all those things that maybe he could have been advocating for 6 years ago when he actually had power and had both houses of Congress and the faith of the American people. But here it comes, 6 years later. Well, I think it's really important to reject this framing of our situation. First of all, we have not had a recovery by any measure. 1 out of every 2 Americans is in or near poverty, including half of children in public schools. 1 out of 3 seniors relies on Social Security to stay out of poverty. Average wages have been stagnant and, in fact, decreasing. 6 million jobs have been created, but even more people are still out of work, 8 million, who are not counted by the unemployment figures that are designed to essentially cover up unemployment. If those people who are part-time employed because they can't find a full-time job, who are discouraged, who are marginal to the workforce, if they were counted, the unemployment rate would be 12 to 13%, not 5.6%. 76% of those jobs that have been created since 2009 are actually part-time and temporary jobs that pay about half as much as full-time. So even those jobs that have been created are not something to celebrate. They're better than no job at all, but they lock people into poverty. 95% of the economic gains in recovery have gone to the top 1%. Corporate profits have tripled under Obama's watch. The 1% now has 50% of the world's wealth, and the 80 richest people now possess the wealth that the lower 50%, 3.5 billion people have. 40 million students are in debt. 1 million are about to lose food stamps. We are in a state of emergency. We are not in a state of recovery. Secondly, Obama led this charge for austerity that he now claims to be fighting. It looks like progressive Obama has once again taken front stage, hoping we don't remember that he was the one that led the charge for austerity, those very policies that he now claims to be fighting. These policies were not necessary then, and we don't need them now. In fact, they harmed our economy. They prolonged and intensified the crisis and inflicted incredible suffering needlessly on the American people. In other words, Obama says that he's fighting the draconian policies that he implemented. But what did he actually do? He gave away $5 trillion in tax giveaways to the wealthy, tax and other bonuses for the wealthy. He made the Bush tax cuts permanent. Remember that? Several $1 trillion of tax cuts for the wealthy. Barack Obama made permanent. They were about to go away, and he made them permanent. He locked in the very capital gains tax, the low tax at 20% that he now claims to be fighting. He's the one who locked that in. And he abolished the inheritance tax, which is virtually abolished for all except people earning over inheriting over $10 million. He also increased payroll taxes on working people. He himself has been the advocate to lower the corporate tax rate from 35 to 26%, even though with current loopholes, that tax rate is actually only about 12%. And many highly profitable corporations are paying 0 taxes or less, including GE, Duke Energy, PG&E, Verizon, and so on. Apple paid very little or no taxes on billions of profits in 2013. Barack Obama also led the fight for the grand bargain to cut Medicare and Social Security. And, don't be surprised when the grand bargain comes back again. It has been on Obama's agenda since he was inaugurated in 2008. And I'll also mention finally that Obama oversaw $14 trillion in bailouts for Wall Street and large corporations. He's also been advocating for the trade agreements that we'll hear more about tonight from one of our speakers. These trade agreements, including the Trans-Pacific Partnership, the agreement that's now on the docket, that he's working very hard for, has sent jobs overseas, or its predecessors have sent millions of jobs overseas. They undermine worker pay and jobs and worker safety and protections. They undermine public health and environmental protections at home and abroad. And most importantly with the TPP, it undermines national sovereignty. You'll hear more about that. It's very important that we fight that. Likewise, on the environment and climate, Barack Obama will claim to have done all kinds of great things for the climate, but remember, on balance, he's been an advocate of all of the above policy, which has dramatically increased fossil fuel emissions from the U.S., or they have externalized them. So while he has done important things, they're unfortunately vastly overwhelmed by his massive increases in fossil fuels through fracking, through offshore oil, through oil in all areas, including on public lands. So, and I should mention coal as well. Barack Obama has also sabotaged international climate agreements, and the agreement with China is a tiny drop in the bucket. Yes, it's a step forward, but it unfortunately doesn't amount to a hill of beans in what needs to be done on the climate. And I'll just mention briefly on foreign policy that we need a foreign policy based on international law, human rights, and diplomacy instead of militarism. Our current foreign policy has been an outright incredible disaster. Drones and torture have especially been damaging. And the past decade of endless war on terror has been an unmitigated disaster, which is now blowing back at us in the proliferation of extremist groups. ISIS itself grows directly out of the chaos that we seeded in Iraq through 10 years of vicious warfare and sectarian conflict that was promoted by our policies in Iraq. So I want to, at this point, mention that, or I guess the key point here is that these problems are solvable, and they are solvable together. We'll hear more about this from Howie Hawkins, and essentially we can solve these converging crises with a converging solution in the form of a Green New Deal that creates an emergency jobs program to put everyone back to work in living wage jobs that transform our economy on an emergency basis to a green economy, put everyone back to work, zero out our climate emissions by 2030, and make wars for oil obsolete, and establish the infrastructure for health. Through these savings in health, a drastically reduced military budget, and reduced energy expenditures, we can actually pay for this and more many times over. The savings drastically outweigh the costs, and furthermore, there is no going forward. We cannot go forward without a climate, without a food supply, and without water. So these are the kinds of solutions that we are standing up for and that you're going to hear more about tonight from our other speakers. So again, I want to thank you so much for listening, for being here tonight, and for tuning in.